Do you want an easy way to encourage your team's best behaviors and limit the bad ones? In this video, you'll learn 3 tips for running powerful weekly coaching sessions to help your team perform their best. Hi, my name is Marc Petitpas. I'm the CEO of Marc Petitpas Business Coaching. And welcome. This week, we're talking about how to run effective weekly one-on-one sessions to drive performance of your team, help them grow, and help your company grow. I'm going to share 3 tips this week, so let's jump right into it. The first tip is really understanding the balance of inquiry versus advocacy and using the magic of open-ended questions. So what does that mean? Well, usually when you see people do one-on-ones, if they're doing them at all, they become update meetings, and there's a lot of telling from the boss to the person who reports to them. Inquiry versus advocacy and open-ended questions are that ability to find out what's causing your team member to be successful, so they repeat it, and where they're struggling if they're not delivering the results, so you can help them correct the behavior and improve. And so what does that look like? Well, open-ended questions are questions that cannot be answered with a yes or a no. And your desired state at beginning should be to inquire what's making them successful and where they need some help. And then advocating, telling them, reassuring that you've heard what's working for them, so they repeat that behavior, and advocating a solution where you've heard where their deficiency is and how you can help them succeed. What does that look like in a one-on-one session? It may be you're reviewing your key performance indicators and they've had a great sales week in sales. And you say, hey, what a phenomenal week. You beat budget by $10,000. Your average sale was up by 10%, and your accessories were ahead about the company average. That's great. You're providing recognition, but what you want to do is find out what the behaviors are so you can validate that for the employee. They'll repeat the behaviors, and you can share it with someone else on your team to multiply that result. So tell me how you accomplish that result. That is an open-ended question that's inquiry-driven. Oh, well, I spent a lot more time on the floor, a little less time on my breaks, a little less time shifting stuff, and more time taking care of attention when the customer walked in. There could be a million reasons of what you're getting out of those questions. And where you've trained them to succeed in the past and they're performing those behaviors, you advocate. Hey, that's a phenomenal job. You're really crushing your sales numbers, which helps your paycheck and helps the store be successful. So congratulations. And you're doing that by really paying attention to the consumer coming through the front door. Did I hear that correctly? Now that is inquiry versus advocacy to recognize behaviors through open-ended questions. On the flip side, let's assume that person had a bad week in a retail environment. I'll pick that. And their numbers aren't there, and they missed their sales, and they missed their average sale, and they missed their upgrades. They missed all 3 KPIs. What the heck? You could say, hey, you've had way more successful weeks than last week, and that's okay. We're going to have bad weeks sometimes. But I got to tell me what's going wrong. Why do you think you had a rough week last week and your results weren't there? Oh, well, I got a lot of time, having to do inventory instead of being on the sales floor. And I also, I'm really struggling to sell shoes. I see everybody else is selling shoes really well, and I can't seem to sell the expensive shoes where my peers are, or whatever those answers may be from those inquiry-driven questions. And your advocacy could be, okay, well, if I heard you correctly, one is you're not spending enough time on the sales floor. So let's look at your balance of inventory management versus sales, and let's revisit that, and let's make sure you get more time on the sales floor. The other thing you mentioned is your high-price ticket items, you're not being as successful where some of your peers on. Tell me what you know about selling the Air Jordans and what you're hearing as objections. And those are all inquiry-driven questions to find out more, and what I would then do is advocate a solution as their leader. Hey, why don't we get you into the next product knowledge session with Nike? When their technical rep comes in, let's get you a little more information on the product knowledge around the Air Jordan so you can fully understand it, because I heard you don't know it enough. Great. Now that's inquiry versus advocacy through open-ended questions, and it applies in any industry you're in, whatever your performance metrics are, as long as you can isolate the behaviors as a leader by asking proper questions so they repeat the behaviors and advocate that it's right when they're doing well and help them close the gaps when they're struggling. Inquiry versus advocacy through open-ended questions. Probably one of the biggest skills that I've used as a leader throughout my career, whether it's in one-on-one, whether it's coaching on the floor, whether it's dealing with a customer, whether it's dealing with a peer, and heaven forbid, even dealing with it at home with kids and family.
Am I right or am I right or am I right?
Open-ended questions, seeking to learn and understand, and then providing your expertise to help. Second point I wanted to talk about this week is willingness versus knowledge. One of the things I hear about a lot from coaches and leaders is, but I'm doing all this stuff and when's enough? And when do I stop training? Here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is if you've transferred the skill by identifying the behaviors that are lacking and you've attempted to close them and your employee has said, yep, I get it, I'll try that. And they're deciding not to try that. That is your definition and your line between willingness and knowledge. That's the good news. If they're not willing to perform the behaviors that will make them successful, or they don't have behaviors that come to the plate and create the result that are different, they're not willing to follow the direction and they're not willing to accept that support. That's no longer a coaching moment and that's a performance management moment. Here's the bad news, but it's good news in my eyes. The bad news is as long as they're willing and it's a knowledge gap, it's on you as a leader to continue to help them close that knowledge gap. Because every time you give them a learning, they take it in, they adapt it, they listen, they perform it, they execute, and all you've got is just a new learning gap that's holding them back. That's a knowledge gap, and that's on you as a leader to help them close that knowledge gap. So that's the second tip that I wanted to give people that are in leadership positions that have weekly one-on-ones is like, when do I stop coaching and when do I start performance managing? Well, that's it. When they're no longer willing to open up, give you the feedback and perform the expected behaviors, you can't coach that anymore. But as long as they're open and they implement that coaching, it's up to you to keep filling that knowledge gap. The third thing I wanted to share with you about running effective one-on-ones, and there's multiple points. These are 3 of the 5 that I train. The third one is, how do you recognize wins, coach gaps on behaviors you did or did not see? And on one of the portions of my training, I talk about coaching during the game, and that's easy to see when you're live and in the environment. But you can't be all there all the time as a manager or leader, especially if you've got multiple staff. And let's go back to the retail example for a moment. Let's say you're a district manager and you can't be every store in the Northeast or in the west of Canada, northeast of the city, wherever you lead. But you can in your one-on-ones ask those open-ended questions to identify the behaviors that happened when you weren't there. So let's go back to that example with a store manager from a district manager to give you some live examples. Hey, you know what? The district had a great week. I'm looking at your store stats. Although you hit your budget, thank you, by the way. I want to talk about why you did. Apparel seems to be down. I'd like to talk about that today. Your apparel sales were off. But first, let's start about the sales result. You guys did hit your sales numbers. Awesome. What caused that? Oh, hey, Marc, you know what? I brought in the staff. I spent 3 extra labor hours times 6 staff, but it was within my budget. And we got all the visual merchandising done so we could spend all our time on the floor. And I had all the sales team gunned and ready to hit that floor, performing all the behaviors they were trained on. It was a beautiful thing to see. Hey, great. If I heard you correctly, what caused your overall sales success last week was your ability to identify that the team was not spending enough time on the floor. You resolve that within your financial responsibilities of budget. You got everybody on the floor, and that's the behavior that won. Great. I'd like you to take that forward. How do we implement that moving forward? How do I support you as a leader? Do you need a little more budget? Do I help you manage that budget? Because getting people on the floor delivered the result. Awesome. Hey, let's talk a little bit about your apparel sales, though. They're down. What's going on with apparel in your store? Same thing, right? Same open-ended questions that I discussed earlier in step 1, same inquiry versus advocacy that I talked about in the context of not seeing it. I wasn't there. So tell me how you're managing your apparel sales. Well, I did the visual merchandising change, but we didn't get it all done. Okay, and so what portions didn't you get done? Well, I didn't get the outerwear to the front of the store. Okay, so if I heard you right, you got most of the visual merchandise change done, but you didn't get the outerwear done. What's the weather in Quebec today, Marc?
On this Monday night, a brutal blizzard blast.
Okay, so what do you think people would be looking? Yeah, they'd be looking for, okay, how do you resolve that problem? Let's get that outerwear to the front of the store, and now let's move forward, making sure that the visual merchandising is done on time. Those are the behavior gaps that I'm seeing that I can help coach after the fact, both to recognize, because when I want to recognize a result, I want to recognize it based on behaviors so they get repeated and trust grows between me and the person that I'm leading, because everyone wants to feel valued and good job isn't enough. good job, how did you do it, is what people thrive on. So they're really rewarded for the behaviors and the efforts that they're putting in. Same thing on the gap side, where there's a struggle in performance. I can ask the questions about the past behaviors so I can help them reconcile the future behavior. And that's how you coach when you're not there. Really hope you enjoyed these 3 tips. They're 3 of the most crucial tips in a weekly one-on-one session. Go implement them with your team today. If this video was valuable to you, here's what I'd suggest. Have a look at my online training for servant leadership. I train the 5 key behaviors, and more importantly, I give you the coaching document that goes with each of those as a resource moving forward. So in 5 one-hour videos, you'll learn about all of these steps, and you'll have in perpetuity a downloadable coaching form for each of those to be successful when you leave that training. So have a look if you want to learn more about servant leadership.